Good morning. I have a little presentation for you today that I call What the Heck is Going On? And what this is about is now that we are into the year 2026 and are seeing some things happening, we can dig a little deeper into the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction and also a moment in late July that I called the Great Harmony. And we can talk a little bit more about what has happened and what to expect with these things. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Let's see, I've got to get rid of some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. So just bear with me. Okay, and here we are. What the heck is going on? The impact of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the upcoming Great Harmony. And here's a list of the topics I'm going to cover. First, I want to go over a prelude to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And in this prelude, I'll talk about why the impacts of this conjunction began pretty much around the start of 2025. And I'll explain why February 20th, 2026, when that Saturn-Neptune conjunction is exact, I'll explain why that is a culmination of what's been going on and not simply the beginning of what to expect afterwards. I'll also explain why I prefer to use a July 2nd, 1776 chart for America instead of the Sibley chart that many other astrologers use. Okay, next I'll talk a little bit about Trump and specifically the chart for the January 20th, 2025 inauguration. I've talked about this before in some other presentations, but it bears repeating because this inauguration chart has been a very accurate roadmap for what Trump has done so far during his second term as president. Then I'll quickly go over the invasion of Venezuela, the killing of Renee Good, Trump at Davos, the killing of Alex Preddy. And even though there are several adverse aspects involved with these events, what I want to emphasize is that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction has been involved with all of them. So these are all impacts to some extent of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Next up, I want to talk about the January 17th, 2026 new moon. That new moon is the most, or was the most harmonious new moon I've ever seen. And I'll explain what I expected, what has happened, and how I am still feeling the ramifications of that new moon in a good way. And that'll bring us up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I'll go over the aspects on that day once again, and how the transits on that day impact America and Donald Trump. Then I have a few slides in a section titled, What About Russia? Russia's a closed society, so we don't know everything that's going on there. But there are indications that Russia is nearing the breaking point with respect to inflation, economic shortages, and all sorts of other things, dissatisfaction with a variety of items. And of course, Russia has a long history of being impacted by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And I'll briefly explain some of the difficult aspects coming up for Russia. Now, there are going to be at least two major aftershocks to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction because both Saturn and Neptune will cross the celestial equator, moving from southern declination to northern declination. And whenever one of the outer planets crosses the celestial equator, that can signal some sort of shift in society. And when two or more planets cross at about the same time, roughly the same time, then the shift is likely to be more pronounced and more likely. So in late March, Saturn will cross the celestial equator, and then in late April, Neptune will cross the celestial equator too, both of them moving from southern declination to northern declination. In between, on April 17th, there is a very ominous new moon with a pileup of 7 planets in Aries. And I'll point out some countries and institutions that will likely be impacted by that new moon. Then we'll move on to late July, where I'll talk about the Great Harmony that is coming up, a day that the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau thought would be the most harmonious day of the century. And then we'll conclude by taking a quick look at lunations, the equinox, winter solstice, from August through December. At the very end, I'll just have a summary of everything. Okay, so that's the plan. And you can always go over to a particular section that you have a specific interest in. All right, the prelude to the February 20th, 2026 Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I've got an abstract here from a research article that was published a few years ago in the journal Correlation. Correlation publishes peer-reviewed articles on statistics, scientific, evidence-based astrology. And this one by the late Dr. Johnson Holt I consider to be particularly important because it basically shows that the impact of outer planet conjunctions and oppositions can be felt at least a year before the actual conjunction or opposition. We begin to see an uptick in major news events at least 1 year before. And of course, the research of Rick Tarnas often suggests that the impact can begin even further than a year before the actual aspect. Okay. And of course, the exact conjunction between Saturn and Neptune is on February 20th of this year. And we're within 1 degree orb from about the second week of February through the first 3 days of March. But throughout almost all of the summer of 2025, Saturn and Neptune, while not achieving exact conjunction, they were within 1 degree of exact conjunction for very extended time. So we did have these 2 planets conjunct last summer. And the upshot of all of this is that we can trace the impacts of this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, if we wish to, all the way back to the beginning of 2025, and maybe even before that. Okay? So, what's happening on February 20th, I see this as not the beginning of a process, but the culmination of a process that's been going on for over a year. And when we look at all the ways in which Trump has upended American government, American democracy, global trade, relationships with allies, etc., even though there are other aspects involved, I believe that those are all also consequences of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that will be exact on February 20th. Okay. Now, there are actually several different charts that astrologers use for America. And I think that many of them are valid because the creation of America was not just a single event that happened at a single moment in time, but sort of a process that unfolded. Some prefer to use the chart for the Battle of Lexington for America. That battle took place before July 1776. Others go further into the future and say that modern America really began with the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. But most people will use a July 1776 chart, and the most popular one is the July 4th, 1776 chart, known as the Sibley chart. Probably a higher percentage of mundane astrologers will use a July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, because July 2nd was the day that the Declaration of Independence was actually passed by the Continental Congress. July 4th was when it went to press and the news was distributed to the public. Now, I consider both charts to be valid. The main difference, aside from house cuffs, is that one chart has moon in Capricorn, the other chart has moon in Aquarius. But since news of the Declaration of Independence went public on July 4th, I think of the Sibley chart as representing more of America's persona, the way we see ourselves or the way we like to see ourselves, and the way we like to present ourselves to the world. And this persona is shown by the moon in Aquarius. We like to think of ourselves as very humanitarian, very charitable, exporting freedom and democracy around the world, and being leaders in technology. Those are all things related to Aquarius. But the inner truth about America, I believe, is shown by Moon in Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn. And unfortunately, or for better or worse, America has a long history of being very controlling. We've tried to control various segments of our population in the past, and even to the present day, we have a very shameful history with slavery, genocide against Native Americans, oppressing other groups from time to time in this country. Women oppressed them a lot in the past. We're oppressing them now. They no longer have freedom of choice, control over their own bodies, for instance. And then we have also spent a lot of time trying to control other countries, often using hard power, more recently using soft economic power, but now it seems under Trump going back to hard militaristic power. So these are the two faces of America. I see the Sibley chart as our persona, the July 2nd chart as perhaps more who we Americans really are. Again, I think both are valid, both are useful, but I will use the July 2nd, 1776 chart in this presentation. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about Trump and the January 20, 2025 inauguration. And I've gone over this before in some other presentations, but here I have a tri-wheel where on the inside I have the July 2nd chart for America. The middle wheel is Donald Trump's birth chart. The outer wheel is his progress chart for the time of his inauguration. And when we compare Trump's natal chart to the USA chart, and this is going to be true with regard to the Sibley chart also, we see that Trump's Chiron is exactly conjunct Saturn, the USA Saturn, to the degree. They're both at 14 plus degrees of Libra. Now, at its worst, this suggests that Trump will do a lot of wounding to the structures of American government and democracy, and since Saturn is in Libra, also to the structure of our relationships with our allies. And Trump did a lot of that during his first term. But this time around, his progress Mars is also at 14 plus degrees of Libra. It's exactly conjunct to the degree his Chiron in the USA, Saturn. And so this tendency to wound, to dismantle structures, dismantle democracy, this is taking place on steroids under Donald Trump during this first year of his second term. Now, if we look at the inauguration chart for the second term, it is extremely telling. Let me mention, though, that if Harris had been elected instead of Trump, she would have had the same inauguration chart, but she would have undoubtedly expressed the tendencies shown in this chart in a different manner. And I'm sure she would have taken the high road and used free will to go against the grain, to mitigate severity that some of these astrological aspects indicate. So, having said that, let's take a look at this inauguration chart. It has the sun in the 10th house, as usual, but this time it is tightly conjunct Pluto. That suggests that Trump would try and increase the power of the executive branch, take more power to himself. And he has done that over and over again in 2025. Transiting Uranus, Uranus is in the first house of this inauguration day chart. That suggests a very chaotic presidency that will also be characterized by a lot of flip-flops and reversals on issues. And again, we have seen that in spades during 2025. In this inauguration chart, Mars is conjunct the cusp of the fourth house. Now, going into the second term, Trump had already announced his plans to deport thousands and thousands of immigrants to this country. And so I could see how that would cause a lot of disruption, often require, police force, federal agents in some way, and probably cause a certain degree of anger among people living in this society, in this country. The fourth house can represent the home in a person's chart, their personal space for a country. It's the homeland and the people living in the homeland. So I expected a lot of use of force, sort of waging war against segments of our society and people being upset or angry about it. However, I could not foresee the extent to which Trump would do this and the amount of anger that he would receive in response to this. So we have really seen the impact of Mars conjunct the cusp of the fourth house in this inauguration chart. Trump has used Border Patrol, ICE agents, National Guard, even the Marines at one point in Los Angeles to implement his immigration policies. A lot of his actions have been done without giving people the due process that they're allowed. American citizens, along with people who are not citizens, have been swept up. People who were let into this country and allowed to reside here while their asylum claim is adjudicated. They have gone to court for courthouse dates on their asylum requests, and then as soon as they leave the courtroom, ICE picks them up, sends them off to another country in some instances. And of course, we have seen American citizens killed by federal agents. And to top it all off, the White House, which is known as the People's House, that's the people's home, Trump tore down part of it. He completely demolished the East Wing. So we've seen a lot of the influence of Mars conjunct the cusp of the fourth house in this inauguration day chart for Trump's second term. And then we have this T-square, which is one of the more important things. We have Chiron in Aries in the 12th house, Moon in Libra in the 6th house, Mercury in Capricorn in the 9th house, and Mercury rules both the 6th house and the 2nd house. Now, the Moon has to do with the people, the public, also health. The 6th house has to do with health and employment. And we have seen a lot of workers wounded by Trump's policies. We have seen healthcare wounded by Trump's policies. We have seen healthcare implemented through the actions of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. People no longer getting vaccines, measles outbreaks starting everywhere. A lot of confusion over what is good health policy and what isn't at this point. Trump has laid off thousands of federal workers, and his economic policies have resulted in thousands of workers in the private sector being laid off. So we have seen a lot of wounding that fits in with this configuration of Chiron in opposition to Moon in the 6th house. And then we have Mercury, which can rule communication. In mundane charts, it can also have to do with trade and commerce. And it's in the 9th house, which rules other countries, but also rules universities, higher education. And with his tariff policies, Trump has wounded the whole global trade network. Soybean farmers in America, oops, let me go back. Soybean farmers have lost their markets. Countries that we put tariffs on, many of them put additional tariffs on us. Many of them have concluded, such as Canada, that America is no longer a reliable trading partner, and they are shifting to trade with China. And throughout all of this, Trump has lied about the tariffs, said that the other countries are paying for them, when everyone with even a smidgen of knowledge about economics or who paid attention during courses in U.S. history knows that it is the importer that pays the tariff. And that tariff fee is often passed on as a tax to the customer in the form of higher prices. And so we have been suffering from inflation also in this country. And Trump has used the power of the presidency and the U.S. government to coerce institutions of higher education into doing his bidding. And Trump has also, by the way, used that power to get many corporations to do his bidding. And so freedom of speech has been wounded in this country. Communication has been wounded. Higher education has been wounded. at some of our major universities. It's no longer appropriate to talk about gender studies or diversity issues, slavery, topics that Trump is uncomfortable with. So there has been a lot of wounding that has been done to these areas by Trump's policies. And with Chiron in the 12th house, we have simply been shooting ourselves in the foot. As Trump wounds these sectors, he is also wounding the country. And then we have Neptune in a strong conjunction with the North Node, the lunar nodal axis. The lunar nodal axis tends to intensify the meaning of Neptune in Pisces. And under Trump, we're not usually getting wonderful visions. We're getting a lot of visions, but oftentimes they are more like nightmares. And we're getting a lot of untruths, out and out lies. We're getting a lot of gaslighting. So in this second administration for Trump, we're experiencing a lot of the negatives of Neptune and Pisces, delusions, fantasies, rather than inspired visions to lead us into the future. So that is where we are. And again, these are additional reasons for things that happen in 2025 after Trump became president, but they also all fit under the umbrella of Saturn conjunct Neptune. Again, the conjunction is exact on February 20th of 2026, but a year before that, it's like that is when a storm surge began. And that storm surge has been rising steadily over the past year, making all sorts of changes to America and the world order. Now, here are a few events that are also related to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. I'll go over them kind of quickly. But first, before I talk about the invasion of Venezuela, let me preface that by saying that right now, progressed Sun is square Mars, natal Mars, in the USA chart. And this is true in both the July 2nd chart I'm using and also in the Sibley chart. With progressed Sun square natal Mars, there's a tendency, expectation for America to become more aggressive. And there is a heightened risk that it will be involved in war or conflict, either at home or abroad. And this year we've seen both, with the invasion of Venezuela and the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Okay, for the invasion of Venezuela on January 3rd, 2026, I've got a bi-wheel here showing the chart for Venezuela on the inside, and transits pretty close to the time of the invasion on January 3rd. And the primary thing I want you to notice here is that Saturn, Neptune are very strongly conjunct natal Mars and in opposition to natal Sun. So this event is connected with the upcoming Saturn-Neptune conjunction. They're not exact conjunct at this point, but they're certainly pretty close within orb, as we say. Now let's take a look at the January 7th, 2026 killing of Renee Good. We don't have an exact time of birth for Renee Good, but we do know the day and place of birth in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So I just set up a chart for 8 a.m. And in this chart, actually, regardless of when she is born on this day, she has Saturn-Neptune conjunct her natal Mercury. Since I don't know the exact time, I just set up a wheel with 0 degrees Aries rising. So I can't say that Mercury's on the cusp of her first house, for instance. But Saturn Neptune is certainly involved in this event. And the tightness of this square over here could vary with the time of day. You get stronger or weaker depending upon what her true birth time is, but it looks like she probably has transiting Mars, Venus, and Sun in Capricorn square her natal moon on this day, and that could be a trigger for the sad events that followed. Okay, January 21st, Trump was at Davos. He went to the annual economic forum or summit in Davos on this day. He had Uranus square natal Mars on that day and before that day. And so we saw a lot of bluster about how he was going to take over Greenland one way or another. But when he was at the conference, transiting Saturn and Neptune were making strong quincunx to his ascendant and to his natal Mars. Now, when signs are quincunx one another, that means they're 150 degrees apart. And signs that are quincunx have nothing in common. Okay? They have different modes, they have different elements. With nothing in common, it's hard to communicate. And you might have a disagreement or conflict with someone, but if there is some common ground there, at least something that allows each party to understand the other, then you have a greater chance of gaining some traction with your arguments. When it's a quincunx, however, there's nothing to get a foothold on. It's very hard to get traction. And so the stronger force will often cause the weaker influence to have to make some changes, some adjustments. And that is what's going on here with Trump once he got to Davos. Now, Saturn and Neptune are conjunct or inside Trump's 8th house. It depends a little bit on which house system you're using. But I'm using Campanus, and this house system, these planets are conjunct the cusp of the 8th house. In other house systems, they may be slightly in the 8th house. Doesn't matter, most of these house systems will show that the influence of this conjunction is coming from the 8th house. And the 8th house classically has to do with death and transformation. It also has to do with debt and other people's money, the resources of others. Now, its counterpart, the 2nd house, has to do with our own resources, our own money. It's what we need to survive. And the sign, which has the natural affinity for the 2nd house, is Taurus, the 2nd house in the zodiac. Taurus is ruled by Venus. Venus is the drive to reduce tension. And as a result, Venus creates a nonverbal map of what we consider pleasurable, what's not pleasurable. That leads to a value system of what we consider to be good and what we consider to be bad. So Venus has a lot to do with the nonverbal right hemisphere of the brain. It's this nonverbal map we set up of what we consider good, what we consider bad, and it's our values. So what's the point of all of this? Well, the 8th house is the 2nd house from the 7th. The 7th represents others. And so the 8th house can also represent the values of others. And that is what Trump ran into headlong at Davos. Leaders of other countries, leaders of NATO, European Union, none of those people liked what Trump was saying about Greenland. They probably liked it less at Davos when he kept referring to Greenland as Iceland. And so he got a lot of pushback because it's Winkunks. He had trouble understanding this. He couldn't get any traction in trying to give counter arguments. And so he did what he often does in situations like this. He just folded. He gave in. And he publicly stated that we would not engage in any sort of military invasion of Greenland. But again, this is an event that shows the influence of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in a particular situation. And now we get to the killing of Alex Preddy on January 24th. We also do not have an exact birth time for him, so I set this up for 8 a.m. I used a 0 degrees Aries generic house system, so just look at the planets and aspects. Don't try and interpret houses, because we don't know what his true house cuffs are. But what you can see here is that Saturn and Neptune are conjunct his natal Mars, and they're making a strong square to Uranus and Saturn in his chart. So again, we have a lot of tension being triggered in his chart on this day by Saturn-Neptune. The philosophies, the policies of others conflict with what he thinks should be done, and it's making him angry, and a violent situation ensued that led to his death. So just a few examples at how the Saturn-Neptune conjunction have impacted some things in January. And now if we take a look at the January 18th, 2026 new moon, this, as I've said, it's the most harmonious new moon I've ever seen. We have a minor grand trine involving almost all of the planets. Uranus, Saturn, and Neptune bring in some higher energies, some more transcendent energies. These planets are making particularly strong aspects to Mars and Mercury, so more transcendent visions, creative ideas. There is a drive at this point to take action on them, to think them through with our left brains, Mercury, and to put these good ideas into practice. Take actions, implement them in some way. Of course, we also have Sun, Moon, Venus, and Pluto within orb of all of this. So this was a very powerful and a very harmonious new moon. And some of the things I expected were a calm day in the world, people formulating creative plans and future visions that will enhance their control over their personal lives. That's a result of all the planets, personal planets we had in Capricorn, and also a further opening up of people's minds to the harmonious aspects from outer planets to personal planets, and that favors more progressive thinking, which often results in people protesting the status quo. Now, I'll also note that hard aspects frequently result in action, while soft aspects could indicate seeds planted for the future, things that unfold over time. Also, the aspects of the new moon set a tone that can be underlying throughout the entire lunar month. Additionally, many of the children born this day will express remarkable wisdom when they grow up. A lot of the people born around my time had some very transcendent aspects going on, such as Pluto strongly sextile Neptune. And when we came of age in the late 60s, we were the hippie generation. We had a more transcendent, more progressive view on things. Now, according to Microsoft Copilot, some of what happened that day was there's relatively calm. There's a relatively calm day in the world. But there were protests in Greenland and Denmark against America on that day. And there were also intensifying protests taking place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, speaking on a more personal level, there are those who will feel themselves opening up more on a spiritual level as a result of the harmony of this new moon. And the impact of this new moon, this is my personal experience. It's lingered throughout the month, coming to the forefront at odd moments throughout the day, resulting experiences of oneness and more strongly channeling that still small voice within. And if people are experiencing this the way I am, they will realize that the spiritual world is what is actually real. And the exterior world, with all its cruelty and deception and greed, is in many respects only an illusion, a passing shadow. And part of what we need to do is cling to that inner spiritual world and not get too caught up in all these horrible events in the external world. We need to take action to try and heal things and correct things, but don't be overwhelmed by it. As bad as it is at times, it is a passing shadow. And what we need to do is cling to that inner wisdom and that inner spirituality. And as people do so, they will realize the words of Joel 3:1. That's in the Hebrew Bible, and the King James, I think they put at the end of chapter 2, 2:28. So look for it in either of those places. But that is where it says that sons and daughters will prophesy, old men will dream dreams, and young men shall have visions. That is what I have felt. This harmonious, incredibly harmonious new moon bringing into my life off and on. And perhaps this is the real solution to all the difficulty the world is in now. The more people connect with this higher spirituality within themselves, the more they will better understand what is right and what is wrong. And they will raise up their voices against what is wrong, and more will turn to do what is right. Okay, now let's get to the actual conjunction of Saturn and Neptune. As I've pointed out in some other presentations, the last time that Saturn and Neptune were conjunct in the first degree of Aries was in the year 4361 BCE. This is around a time that historians call the dawn of civilization. So this was approximately 6,000 years ago. So we may be beginning another 6,000-year cycle. And just as there was a great leap forward for humanity at the time of this conjunction in 4361, so we may be beginning at another great leap forward for humanity. I certainly hope so. Worst case scenario is this would signify the end of our cycle, and humanity would then start to go away. I don't think that's what's going to happen, but that is one of the possibilities. Now, this conjunction is going to be strengthened by the fact that there is a solar eclipse just 3 days prior to it. At that solar eclipse, Saturn and Neptune are already pretty strongly conjunct in Aries, so their impact will be felt. There's also a very strong square between Uranus and the Sun and the Moon. I need to move this circle up a little bit, perhaps to cover the Moon a little bit more precisely. Chiron begins to make a semi-square, a sesquiquadrate, to the ends of the lunar nodal axis. That might intensify some difficulties and some wounding within the world, particularly through war, since Chiron is in Aries. And this is going to last for a while. It's not just a one-day thing. We do have Jupiter trine Mercury, however. That will release a little bit of tension. It will help with communication, harmonious communication, and the bringing forth of good visions and good ideas. Okay, we get to the exact conjunction on February 20th. We've got Saturn conjunct Neptune. We have Chiron still making the semi-square and sesquiquadrate to the lunar nodal axis. Uranus, instead of making a square to the moon, is now making a semi-square. So, the previous square of Uranus to Sun and Moon, that sets a tone where patterns are going to be breaking up and things can be chaotic. The semi-square we have on this day just emphasizes that a little bit more. And we have Pluto making a semi-square to Mercury. So there could be some transformation or oppression of ideas or free speech, or there could be protests and intensity of thought in some way. Sesquiquadrates and semi-squares are often turning points. They're not as strong as regular squares, but given the right conditions, they can be the straw that breaks the camel's back. Now, as far as good aspects, we now have Jupiter this time trine Venus instead of Mercury. So this speaks more to the right brain, and it brings some harmony into the things we're feeling, our values, and what we think would be good visions, good ways forward. And with Chiron making a sextile to Mars on this day, well, that can make it easier for some groups to implement healing, particularly humanitarian groups. This sextile lasts for just a few days, but hopefully we'll get something good out of it. Now, not long after the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, both Saturn and Neptune will conjunct the celestial equator, moving from southern declination to northern declination. Saturn's going to cross in late March and Neptune in late April. And when Neptune crosses over zero declination, it denotes a change in the social myth. With both Saturn and Neptune crossing together, we can expect restructurings of those social myths. So those crossings are going to be like aftershocks to this tsunami of a Saturn-Neptune conjunction that we began going through a year ago. And let's see, Saturn is going to cross on March 26th, and Neptune is going to cross on April 24th, and then later in the year again, going from north to south on September 16th, and then on February 26, 2027, it will cross again into northern declination, where it will remain for quite a while. So this changing of the social order, that is going to take a little bit of time, but it's clearly already underway. Now, if we look to see what aspects we have for America on February 20th, Well, we have Saturn and Neptune squaring natal Venus exactly to the degree using this July 2nd, 1776 chart for America. That says that the aggressive policies that the country is taking, it's not sitting well with people's values and their sense of security. And of course, I can't fail to mention that the last time Neptune was at the first degree of Aries, making the square to natal Venus, was the morning after the start of the American Civil War. And that's another time in which there was a clash between people's values and official policies. We also have transing lunar nodal axis, square natal Uranus, that has been going on for a while and will continue for a while this spring. This is intensifying Uranus in America's natal chart, and this is the same in both July 2nd and July 4th charts. But this is worrisome is because whenever Uranus is activated, America often tends to find itself in conflict either at home or abroad. This was during the American Revolution, during the American Civil War, and during World War II. We also have Jupiter, transing Jupiter, square natal Saturn. And on the one hand, this can represent a clash between progressives, Jupiter, and conservative Saturn. But Jupiter is going through the 10th house in this USA chart. So this can also represent a clash between an overly powerful president and the country, which is trying to follow the rule of law, Saturn in Libra. One interesting thing is that in the progress chart for America around this time, Jupiter is also at 15 degrees of Cancer, making a square again to natal Saturn. So we're seeing this both by transit now and also by progression in general. Transiting Mercury, let's see, is pretty strongly square natal Mars. This could result in some angry or aggressive rhetoric at this point. It could stimulate or provoke some violence too. Let's hope that does not happen. We have transing Chiron making a semi-square to natal Uranus. That is just adding fuel to the fire, shown by the lunar nodal axis squaring Uranus. We have transiting Uranus, however. Oh, before I get to that, another sesquiquadrant. Transiting Mars is making a sesquiquadrant to the natal ascendant. And again, that could also set off some irritation, some aggressive actions, either at home or abroad. Transiting Uranus, however, will be trine natal Pluto. Pluto, in the chart for a country, represents the country's power. And that is often synonymous with the leader of the country. But in America, America is designed in such a way as for power to be in the hands of the people. So even though this could work out favorably for Trump, I think more often this represents something favorable when it comes to the people's power. And Uranus can be connected with revolution, Pluto with protest. And I am seeing the people rise up more and more in protest in this country. And I think the people are trying to reclaim their power And I believe that this aspect will help facilitate that. Now we also have Mars making a very strong quincunx to Neptune. There might be some aggressive actions of some sort that will force people to change their beliefs and their perspectives, their philosophy regarding certain things. For instance, if more American citizens are killed by federal agents, that would probably cause some people to rethink their support for the current administration. Now, if we look at how Trump is impacted by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, the first thing I want to note is that this conjunction is taking place in his 8th house, pretty close to the cusp of that 8th house, and that is going to happen under most house systems that you might use. Again, I'm using Kepinus in this case. But 8th house does have that connotation of death. And there is a possibility that Trump could die sometime later this year or undergo some kind of transformation later this year. This house also has to do with other people's money, with debt, and other people's values. So just as was the case at Davos, Trump could be forced to bend and adjust to the values of other people and maybe voices of millions and millions of people protesting against his policies. Remember, this is just a weather report. Will Trump die? Will he not die? I don't know. This is just a weather report. And when we look at the weather report, we see that there is a heightened probability for certain outcomes. And Trump dying or getting sick and having to leave office, those are two of the possibilities. But that's not necessarily what's going to happen and not necessarily the most likely outcome. But it's something to keep in mind. Okay, now Trump, transiting Chiron, is squaring his natal Saturn. That can affect his status since his natal Saturn is conjunct his natal Venus, which rules his 10th house. This could also represent a wounding to his relationships with others, probably other world leaders or other businessmen. And Saturn rules his 6th house of health. So Trump could have some health problems that we'll be hearing more about. Transiting Jupiter is square his natal Chiron. That suggests some sort of wounding might occur. Could affect him personally or financially. Transiting Uranus is still square natal Mars. That's been going on for a while. And for quite a while, he's been very angry, very loud, very angry, very chaotic in his actions. Very vocal about the people he hates. His transiting lunar nodal axis is making a semi-square and sesquiquadrant to his natal Saturn. That is going to exacerbate things like Chiron square natal Saturn. So again, he could have some health problems or other difficulties that we may not know about right now. On the good side, let's see, he has the transiting lunar nodal axis trine and sextile his natal Mercury. He's had that for a while, so he's been a pretty effective communicator. Whether what he's saying is true or not, he gets his message out there. And transiting Mars is trine his natal Sun. This aspect only lasts for a few days, but at this point in time, is going to be strengthening his constitution. And it will help lessen the severity of some of the squares to Mars. Okay. And given the import of this conjunction, this moment, that could be an influence that lasts longer than just a few days. Okay, now what about Russia? Well, the thing is, Russia has this long history of being impacted by Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. During the last Saturn-Neptune conjunction, for instance, the Berlin Wall came down. And various countries left the Soviet Union. And a few years later, that resulted in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And Russia lost a lot of territory it had had control over. Now, as I always say, Russia is a very secret society with no real free speech. We don't know exactly how people feel, what's going on in the country a lot of the time. But the aspects that follow February 20th indicate that Russia is going to begin to be impacted by outer planet troubles that will probably bring about some serious change or reformation. We don't know if Putin will die in office, if he'll be thrown out, but I see more and more articles in the news about how Russia may be about to break due to economic instability. Well, let's see. Here we have for several months Pluto, transiting Pluto conjunct Saturn. That could indicate the destruction of Russia's infrastructure or that of others. And then we have Saturn square Sun, Neptune square Sun, Uranus square Moon. Saturn and Neptune square the Sun could spell trouble for Putin. The Sun usually represents the leader of a country, and possible assassination attempts. And Uranus square the Moon could put the people in the mood for a revolution. Now, it's not only 2026, which is going to have these astrological difficulties for Russia, but the years that follow are also going to be difficult, because here's what's going on. Transiting Pluto, this is a little pop-up of the Russian chart. We don't know the exact time of its rebirth in, I think, December 25th, 1991, but this is put in late afternoon, a little bit before when they finally took the old Soviet Union flag down and put up the new Russian flag, but obviously the decision was made before the change of the flags. So, anyway, whatever the correct rising sign is, at this moment, Pluto is about here in conjunction with Saturn. After it moves past its conjunction with Saturn, it will be in opposition to Chiron. So we're moving from destruction of structures to very specific wounding. And in summer of 2026, Chiron is going to move into Taurus. And so it's going to be up here somewhere. In the years that follow, it will first make a square to Saturn, which will last quite a while. And then it will make a square to natal Chiron. So this Saturn-Chiron opposition in the Russian chart is going to be stimulated and activated over and over again, probably causing wounding to structures and wounding to the country. And here you can see graphically when each of these aspects will be in effect. Starts in 2026 and even carries over into 2030. And so by the time this is all over and done with, we will probably be seeing a very, very different Russia. I'd be surprised if Putin is still in charge. If Putin does die or is taken out of power, it could happen soon after the exact conjunction this year, or it may happen over time as all of these aspects come into play. Okay, now using the July 2nd, 1776 chart for America, that chart will have a new moon, a progressed new moon on March 9th of 2026. And this is what it looks like. The progressed new moon will happen at 19 degrees, 26 minutes of Pisces. Now, if I set up a bi-wheel with my natal chart for America on the inside, the progressed new moon chart on the outside, there are a lot of tense aspects. And the one that concerns me the most is Sun and Moon are making a square to natal Mars, which is exact to the degree. That is just another indicator of us getting involved in war or aggression in the near future. Also, progressed Jupiter is square natal Saturn, and we recently saw in a natal chart where Jupiter by progression was squared natal Saturn. It was at the same point. It's in the same place in the progressed chart, and this is going to last longer. So everything I said previously about this square between Jupiter and Saturn is going to apply for a much longer period. Conflict between progressives and conservatives, or conflict between Trump's over-the-top actions and the structures that guide our country, the rule of law. The progressed lunar nodal axis is conjunct Mercury and the Moon. That's going to put a focus on commerce, trade, and the people, and what the people need. And progressed Mercury and midheaven are sesquiquadrate, the natal midheaven. So that will probably could play out in terms of more vocal protests against the Trump administration, the people who are in power at this moment in time. And by the way, since natal Jupiter is close to the cusp of the 10th house, anytime we have a transit or progression by Jupiter making an aspect, that could directly affect the executive branch of our government. Okay, on March 26th, Saturn crosses the celestial equator. We look at the chart for this day. Saturn's moving into northern declination. But looking at the chart for this day, not a whole lot going on in this chart. Yeah, not a whole lot of big aspects here or there. If we look at how it impacts America's chart, a lot of trouble. We got transing Chiron and Venus, square natal Mercury and the Moon. That could be wounding to the people, wounding to trade, commerce, wounding to free speech, also wounding to the executive branch. Transing lunar nodal axis, square natal Uranus. I told you that's been going on and will be going on for a while. That's stirring up revolutionary fervor among people. And some people have asked, are we going through a civil war or a second American Revolution, or both? You could look at either way. Now, at its best, this would stimulate American invention and ingenuity. That's another aspect of Mars. Uranus and Gemini at this point is associated with foreign conflict for America, but it's also been associated with invention, because times of war, unfortunately, often are times of great invention and innovation at the same time as we create new technologies to help us with the war effort. Okay, what else? Transit Jupiter, square natal Saturn still. Transiting Saturn is making a square to natal Jupiter, so that's a double whammy involving Saturn and Jupiter. And again, it'll probably represent not only battles between progressives and conservatives, but also between an over-the-top executive branch, that's what we've been seeing, and a more conservative public that wants things reined in and the rule of law to be followed. We have transiting Pluto. It's moving into conjunction with the South Node. We're not actually within the 1 degree orb that I often use, but we're getting close to that. And we'll get those exact conjunctions in 2027, 2028, just as we tend to become involved in conflict at home or abroad during Uranus returns, which will also occur in 2027, 2028. We also get involved in conflict and social upheaval whenever transiting Pluto is stimulating the lunar nodal axis in this natal chart. And this also applies to the July 4th Sibley chart if you want to look at that one instead. But also on this day, transiting Mars will be making a very strong square to natal Mars. They're both at 19 plus degrees of their respective signs. And so this could be a trigger for some sort of conflict on this day. Conflict or accidents, anything of a Martian nature. And we have transiting Pluto still making a sesquiquadrant to natal Mars. It's separating now, that's good, but this is just an additional Martian tension being put on things. And that's been going on for a while too. If we look at how Trump is impacted on this day, well, he's got transiting Chiron in Venus, where his natal Venus, that's wounding bad things for his status. Transiting Jupiter, square natal Chiron, that can cause some wounding. Transiting Saturn and Sun, opposite his natal Neptune. Oh, these are in the 8th house of death and transformation. There are all sorts of things that can be triggered by this. He could be very delusional. He could have a fever, infection. He could be assassinated. There could be an assassination attempt around this time. Either way, there is some tension between his visions and maybe other people wanting more control, more regulation on things that he's doing. Transiting lunar nodal axis will be making a semi-square sesquiquadrant to natal Saturn. That is just going to add some extra emphasis to any other thing going on involving Saturn. And this could also denote some illness, since Saturn rules its 6th house of health, or some changes in the way he structures things or does business. This Saturn is conjunct his Venus, which rules his 10th house, so that too could affect his status. He'll have transiting Pluto making a trine to his natal Neptune. Again, that's been ongoing for a while, and he is coming out with all sorts of grand transformative visions, building ballrooms that will dwarf the White House itself, completely rebuilding the Kennedy Center that he's renamed the Trump Kennedy Center. building what some call his Arc of Trump, sort of modeled after the Arc of Triumph in France. He will have an easy time coming up with these grand transformative visions, but those visions are not necessarily good visions. Just because it's easy for him doesn't mean it's good. And then the lunar nodal axis is making favorable aspects to his natal Mercury. So he will continue to dominate in communication. That will intensify his communication, make it easy, doesn't necessarily make it good, however. Okay, next thing on our menu coming up is the April 17th, 2026 new moon, which looks very ominous. Pile up of 7 planets in Aries. It's a sign that wants independence, but it's a sign that can also be very assertive and very aggressive. We've got Mercury conjunct Neptune, which could lead to a lot of idealistic kind of thinking. It could lead to visions that are good, but could lead to visions that are false also. A lot of misinformation, a lot of fooling oneself. Mars is pretty strongly conjunct Saturn. That is worrisome. Those 2 planets are the gods of war. So this could set off some sort of physical conflict. And then we have a strong conjunction between Chiron, Moon, and Sun. This sets a tone of wounding throughout the next lunar month, particularly wounding through war or other forms of aggression. Saturn and Mars will be making a semi-square to natal Venus. That adds a little bit more insult to injury. Pluto will be making a sextile, though, to Mercury, Mars, and Saturn. That could result in some easier, more positive transformation, and that may provide a safety valve for some of the tensions that are occurring with the conjunction of these planets in Aries. And then Saturn is making a semi-sextile and quincunx to the lunar nodal axis. There is going to be pressure for change or adjustment in some of the structures or disciplines in the world. With this big pileup in Aries, a lot of these changes may come through militaristic or other kinds of aggressive means. And that, as I've said, is very worrisome. And we have already seen signs that the old world order may be going away. And the question is, what will be the new world order that takes its place? Okay, if we look at how this new moon will affect America on April 17th, I'm just going to focus in this chart and others that follow on how the planets we have in Aries are going to impact things. And America is going to be affected by this April 17th new moon quite a bit. Sun, Moon, and Chiron are all going to be squaring natal Pluto. If Pluto represents the people's power, then this could be bad news. This could indicate some sort of wounding to the people's power. If this reflects Donald Trump's power instead, it could be wounding to his power, or both. If we look at Trump himself, the Saturn-Mars conjunction is going to be opposite his natal Neptune. Again, this could be a time of danger, of physical danger for Trump. It could be danger from an accident, from a violent attack, an assassination attempt, an infection, or from some other health problems since Saturn rules the sixth house of health. We don't know exactly which one, but we do expect something to happen with a heightened probability at this time, which resonates with the meanings of these particular planets. At the same time, the Sun-Moon Chiron conjunction in Aries will be making a very strong, a very nice trine to his natal Mars, and this is going to strengthen his constitution. And so there's a good chance that whatever difficulty is caused by this opposition to Neptune will be lessened in severity by the trine to his natal Mars. Again, this is just a weather report. It's like when the weatherman says there's probably going to be a big storm surge over the next few days as a result of this hurricane. Well, sometimes the storm surge is more or less than anticipated. And also, we don't know exactly which structures are going to be blown away by the hurricane. All we know is that there's some sort of general difficulty headed that way that will occur on such and such a date. But the particulars about what happens, that depends on other variables too, such as a person's free will, which can always make a given situation worse or better. NATO will probably be impacted by this April 17th new moon because Sun, Moon, and Chiron are conjunct NATO's north node, and Saturn, Mars, and Mercury are conjunct natal Mercury. And we don't have an exact time of birth for NATO. We have the date, and I just set this chart up for 12 p.m. on that date. But certainly these aspects will be present regardless of what the true birth time for NATO is. The United Nations, surprisingly, we have an exact birth time for the United Nations. And it will probably be impacted by this April 17th new moon. We have trancing Mars and Saturn opposite Venus and Neptune. So there's going to be some kind of aggressive action which is affecting the values and philosophy of NATO. We have transiting Neptune and Mercury square the lunar nodal axis. Some alternative visions or maybe misinformation, disinformation. Other ideas are going to gain intensity at this moment and probably create a bit of a crisis for NATO or the United Nations. The Federal Reserve could be impacted because trancing Sun, Moon, and Chiron are square natal Neptune. We know that Jerome Powell's term as the Fed chair is up in mid-May, so it's just about over. Trump has indicated who he wants the new Fed chair to be. Something related to the Federal Reserve may cause some problems around April 17th. With a square to Neptune, there may be issues regarding inflation, for example, or something else of a Neptunian nature going on. Transiting Mars, however, is making a sextile to natal Uranus, so there may also be some beneficial actions taken around this time, even while these other tensions are present. So just something to keep an eye on. See what happens with the Federal Reserve. And if we look at the New York Stock Exchange, how it will be impacted by the new moon in April, the answer is not in a good way. transiting Sun, Moon, and Chiron are conjunct. Let's see, natal Saturn and opposite natal Neptune. So there may be some big shocks, some disruption or weakening of the structure of the stock market that begins around this time. And that is reinforced by the fact that transiting Neptune is conjunct the lunar nodal axis in the chart for the New York Stock Exchange. And amazingly, we have an exact time for the birth of the New York Stock Exchange. And then, of course, we've got some other harsh aspects going on. We have transiting Pluto, square natal Venus, transiting Uranus, conjunct natal Sun, and the transiting lunar nodal axis making a semi-square, and sesquiquadrate to natal Jupiter. So this might be the beginning of some downturn to the New York stock market. If so, then I'm glad that last year I moved half of my assets out of mutual funds and into tax-sheltered, long-term, interest-bearing, high-yielding money market account. So that's some of our the retirement portfolio for me and my wife will be saved from whatever ups and downs we see in the stock market. But this is another thing to keep an eye on around this new moon coming up on April 17th. That could be a very tense time. And that's followed by Neptune crossing the celestial equator, going from south to northern declination. Again, not a whole lot of action going on in this chart. But if we look at how it affects America, well, we've got Chiron strongly squaring natal Pluto. I expect that probably to affect the people's power, wound the people's power, could wound Trump's power, or just America's power in general. We have transiting Mars, strongly squaring natal Sun. That could be a trigger for some sort of violence or anger on this day. Transiting Pluto is getting closer to exact conjunction with the South Node. We've talked about that before. It's still not quite within 1 degree, but its influence will probably be felt, and they'll probably be changing things in American society. Transiting Saturn is opposite the natal ascendant and square the natal midheaven. It's forming a T-square with natal ascendant and midheaven. So there are probably going to be more restriction shortages that Americans will be feeling at this time. Transiting Uranus will be making a sesquiquadrate to natal Saturn, breaking up some of the structures of our country. And this may also be stimulating revolutionary feelings. Transiting Saturn will be making a nice sextile to natal Uranus. So if people are protesting and revolting, it will probably happen in a very well-coordinated or disciplined manner. That is what I'm hoping for. This could also represent good coordination between invention and construction, bringing things into reality. We could have, these don't always make the big headlines, but new inventions coming into reality at this moment in time. If we look at how Trump is impacted, well, we've got transiting Chiron. Let's see, squaring natal Venus. It's actually moving out of that aspect. So I needed to update this. Sorry. So let's ignore that one. That's moving past. We do have transiting Jupiter, square natal Jupiter. Trump is likely to be way over the top. We have transiting Uranus, strongly squaring his ascendant. Again, more chaos, more flip-flops, more erratic actions. Transiting Pluto, making a semi-square. Let's see, where's transiting Pluto? Yeah, right here, making a semi-square. Sesquiquadrate to his natal lunar nodal axis. Is that true? Yeah, it is. So the transformative things he's doing or the destructive things he's doing there are going to be intensified. This could also represent health problems, since Pluto will be in his sixth house. And on the good side, we have transiting Pluto trine Neptune. It's still easy for him to implement his visions and transformative visions. And we have transiting Chiron, trine natal Mars. That is going to bring physical healing to him. So that can be a lifeline in the face of all these other tensions. I want to take out this one on transiting Chiron, square natal Venus. That's not in effect anymore. So let me just quickly make a little adjustment here, and then we'll get back to the show. Let's see, I'm going to have to plug in my laptop because I'm starting to run out of some juice here. So give me a second. Okay. And this brings us to what I am calling the Great Harmony. My nose is running a little bit, some pollen in the air. As I've said several times, Andre Barbeau felt like July 21st, 2026 would be the most harmonious day of the century because we have so many sextiles and trines that are exact to the degree. We have Pluto at 40 degrees, sextile Neptune at 4 degrees, sextile Uranus at 4+ degrees, sextile Jupiter at 4+ degrees, Chiron at 0+ degrees, trine South Node at 0+ degrees, sextile Moon at 0+ degrees, sextile North Node at 0+ degrees. We have a couple of aspects creating more tension on this day, but I think they are going to be overridden by the harmonious aspects. So overall, a very harmonious day for the world. And I think the great harmony on the January 18th new moon I talked about earlier, I think that gives us sort of a taste of what all of the harmony on this day, all the outer planet harmony, might be like. Now, for America and for Donald Trump, though, there's going to be a bit of a cloud over this period in time. Transiting Saturn is going to be in opposition to natal Saturn in both July 2nd and July 4th charts for pretty much all of July and August. And actually, we get an exact opposition. It's not shown here. We get exact opposition, I believe, on July 23rd. In between July 23rd and the 29th, Saturn turns retrograde, and we get another exact opposition. So Saturn is moving extremely slowly during this period, and that's why we will be experiencing the Saturn opposition for so much longer than usual. That is going to be a dark cloud hanging over America. something very dark or restrictive will probably experience. And the same thing is happening to Donald Trump with regard to transiting Saturn opposite his natal Chiron. That is going to last for almost all of July and August. Now, on the good side, both America and Donald Trump have one lifeline that will be thrown to them. For America, transiting Chiron will be sextile natal Venus through this period, and that suggests something is going to help bring about some emotional healing, some right brain healing, some healing to our values, and something we will feel help us feel more joyous. For Trump, transiting Chiron will be still making a trine to his ascendant. It gets a little weaker in July and August, but then it's going to get stronger. I think maybe exact in September again. It's exact on June 17th. So something is going to be bringing probably physical healing to Trump in some form or fashion. So both America and Trump, however, will not experience nearly as good a time probably as the rest of the world during the great harmony of July 21st. Saturn is going to be putting a cloud both over America and Trump at the same time. Keep an eye to see what happens. If we look at a USA bi-wheel for this date, we've got transiting Saturn opposite natal Saturn, transiting Pluto, sesquiquadrate natal Mars, transiting Jupiter, making a semi-square to natal Mars. That could be a trigger for something. Transiting Uranus, making a semi-square to natal Chiron. That could be a trigger to something. There could be some violence and some wounding, some accidents at this time. On the good side, transiting Chiron will be making a sextile to natal Venus that lasts a few months. That could bring spiritual healing to the masses. I certainly hope so. That could be a game changer for all of us. And the transiting lunonodal axis is making a sextile and trine to natal Venus. That will intensify the good things involving Venus. So there is some hope for us. And so let's just hope for the best here, but there will be difficulties to deal with. There may be accidents or aggression to deal with. Okay. Let's see. I've got transiting midheaven circle, but that's not applying to anything. So I'll fix that a little later after I finish this presentation. If we look at how Trump is impacted on July 21st, transiting Saturn opposite his natal Saturn, transiting Neptune opposite his natal Neptune. These are both in his 8th house of death, so this could be serious. Neptune being involved could be assassination, could be infection of some sort. Saturn rules his 6th house, could be illness involved. We don't know. But some difficulties. Transiting lunar nodal axis is going to be conjunct his ascendant, descendant axis. That is going to intensify life for him. Transiting lunar Saturn is sesquiquadrate his natal ascendant. That will add insult to injury. Transiting lunar nodal axis is semi-square, and sesquiquadrate is natal Chiron. Okay. So that is going to make things a little bit more interesting for him also. Increases the chances of some sort of wounding. But transiting Chiron, trine his natal ascendant, that can be a very powerful lifeline that is being thrown to him. That could bring him some healing, some degree of healing with respect to these other difficulties. Okay. I don't always look at progressions, don't usually look at them, but if we look at Trump's progressions on this day, I'm just going to focus on these two. You can pause and look at the others if you wish. But he has progressed moon and ascendant in his fourth house, as progressed moon is very strongly square his natal ascendant. This suggests a transfer of focus to his private life, to his personal life, his personal home. And the square to the ascendant suggests some sort of changes to his personal life. This makes me wonder if something will happen around this time or in the months that follow that remove Trump from office. He might be assassinated. That's one possibility. I don't like assassination, so I hope that does not occur. He may have illness and have to leave office because of illness. He may just get so over the top, so blatantly psychotic that the 25th Amendment is finally invoked and he's removed from office. Again, I don't know exactly what will happen, but this is a sign that some change, important change, will occur in his personal life that will remove him from the limelight. And a similar thing happened to Biden when he had to abandon his quest for a second term. And we saw in his chart, I believe, that Saturn was moving into his fourth house by transit, suggesting that he would move out of the limelight. So something like that may happen with Trump. Now, if that happens, what's going to happen with Vance? Well, a lot of things are going on. But the main things going on with Vance suggests that his status is probably going to be suddenly elevated. I'm not going to cover everything in here, but I'm going to talk briefly about the stuff in blue that I've got a box around. When all of these outer planets form this very favorable set of sextiles and trines that are exact to the degree, they're going to be impacting Vance because he has his north node in its 10th house at 4+ degrees of Gemini, so transing Uranus is going to be exactly conjunct that to the degree. And we have all these other outer planets that will be making sextiles or trines to this. Okay? And this means that his future is going to be very intertwined with this harmonious astrological configuration that occurs on July 21st. Now, the North Node, we often say that represents our destiny, what we should be striving for. And his North Node is in the 10th house, which has to do with status. So I would definitely expect some sudden change or elevation of status at this time. He's got transing Uranus conjunct natal lunar nodal axis, North Node in particular, in the 10th house, transing Jupiter, Neptune, Pluto, sextile or trine, his natal lunar nodal axis, transing Neptune, Pluto, trine, or sextile, his natal ascendant. That is also quite beneficial to him. And let's see. There's Pluto. The aspect from, let's see, transing Pluto, it's not going to be, sorry, making that aspect to his ascendant, so I've got to correct that. My mistake here. But it is, transing Pluto is impacting that. And let's see, what about the transing lunar nodal axis? that is making a sextile or trine to natal Pluto. Is that the case? And yeah, that will be the case. Sorry, let me digress real quickly just to make a couple of corrections here. And I'm going to take out Neptune right there. Change this from a period to another mark. And I believe we're ready to continue here. So hopefully these other aspects are going to be exact, but I would double check them out. Sometimes I have things left over from other presentations that I don't get around to updating as I should. And let's see, I'm just taking a quick glance here. Yeah, it looks like the other stuff is correct. Okay. Now, if we look at Vance's progressions, he's got his progressed sun and ascendant making a trine to his natal midheaven, and his progressed midheaven is making a trine to his natal moon. So both the transits and the progressions, they're all suggesting some favorable elevation and change in Vance's status. And that increases the likelihood that Vance may replace Trump as president. I'm sure there are other ways this could manifest, but this is one of the strong possibilities, one thing to keep an eye on. So there's really this question, will Trump still be president by the end of the summer? He could die as a result of something, illness or accident or violence. He could be removed from office as a result of something. Can't say exactly, but something is going to happen which will bring J.D. Vance into the limelight. Now, am I one of those people who says anyone but Trump would be better? Not necessarily. I've got a lot of aspects here between J.D. Vance's chart and the USA chart, but here is the one that concerns me. Vance's Chiron is conjunct the USA Uranus, and Vance's Uranus is in opposition to the USA natal Uranus. So Vance's Chiron and Uranus are strongly stimulating and activating natal Uranus in both July 2nd and July 4th, 1776 charts for America. That worries me because America has a tendency to become involved with war and conflict, either at home or abroad, whenever natal Uranus is strongly stimulated. So that definitely is a concern for me and should be a concern for everyone. So we could have that Vance replaces Trump as president during this period, or it could be that Trump rides out the difficulties of this summer and that Vance's status just improves for other reasons, but he remains as vice president. Now, if Vance does become president, he's not necessarily going to be better than Trump. If you go to ontheissues.org and look at Vance's stances on the issues, his political positions are usually the opposite of mine. He opposes the right of a woman to have control over her own body. He opposes diversity, equity, and inclusion. He opposes transgender and LGBTQ rights. He believes America is a Christian nation founded on Christian values. He opposes expanding Obamacare. He favors vouchers for school choice. I don't. I think that weakens public education, and I'm not necessarily in favor of using my tax dollars to send kids to schools that are teaching, often religious schools, that are teaching views that I don't agree with. He believes businesses have a right to pollute. He believes in stricter punishment will reduce crime. He favors absolute right to gun ownership, opposes higher taxes on the wealthy, opposes a pathway to citizenship for illegal aliens. He opposes free trade. He opposes the UN and globalism. He opposes making voter registration easier. He opposes prioritizing green energy. And he believes marijuana is a gateway drug. So I think every one of his political positions I'm opposed to. And so I don't see Vance as being an improvement necessarily over Trump. And if he does become president, let's see, I'm very worried that he will get us involved in either civil war at home or war abroad. And of course, in 2027, 2028, we're getting into those Uranus returns. And 5 times that transiting Pluto will be conjunct the South Node. Both of these often coincide with war and periods of social upheaval for America. And here is just another graphic showing when Pluto will be in opposition to the North Node, which means it's conjunct the South Node, and when transiting Uranus will be conjunct natal Uranus. Okay, looking at lunations, the fall equinox, the winter solstice for the rest of the year. For the world, at least, things are going to be much more harmonious. As I say, the first half of the year is going to be dominated by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and the after effects and aftershocks from that conjunction, and that very, possibly very horrible April 17th new moon. But the second half of the year is dominated by the great harmony that we had on July 21st. If we look at the solar eclipse on August 12th, a lot of harmonious aspects. New moon on September 10th, a lot of harmonious aspects. Fall equinox, still a lot of sextiles and trines that you see going on here. The one prominent thing is that both Chiron and the North Node will be making a strong quincunx to the Sun, and that suggests that people will be making adjustments and changes as a result of external wounding and other external pressures. And we also have, let's see, Neptune in opposition to that Sun. It's not the strongest, so I haven't highlighted that, emphasized that too much. But we have Sun and Neptune opposite one another, and that could relate to some of these new philosophies that people will have to integrate into their being and adjust to. New moon, October 10th, we're starting to get back into more harmony. We have a couple of minor grand trines here. New moon on November 8th, 2026. Again, we see a lot of nice harmony here. Pretty much mostly harmony. The difference between what we call a mystic triangle, it's not really mystical, that's just what some people start calling it. But the difference between this kind of rectangle and grand trine is the oppositions that are present can act as a stimulus. We feel some friction, but then we have the avenues for reducing that tension. And so it tends to be a little bit more dynamic than just a regular grand trine, I believe. Get to the new moon on December 19th. Again, we have a couple of minor grand trines and some other harmonious aspects going on. And when we get to the winter solstice on December 21st, we have a grand trine and some other a minor grand trine going on too. So, second half of this year for the world in general, it's much more harmonious. And I'm hoping that in addition to expecting people to open up their minds a bit, lean toward progressivism, engage in protests against the ills of society. In addition to all of that, I'm hoping that more and more people will feel these higher vibrations, these expanded states of consciousness within themselves, that they will open up spiritually, that they will channel their own still small voice within, that they will feel more of a connection with all things, and that as a result of this, they will change their perspectives and their actions in the real world. And I'm hoping that more and more people will realize that what's most important is to find and become established in this inner peace. And rather than fighting directly against all the injustices and social change in the world, we do have to respond to those, but instead of fighting them so directly and just banging our heads against the wall, fight them indirectly by changing yourself. If a large enough percentage of people find this inner peace within, this deep inner spirituality, then changes in the world will flow from that. And without having to confront those injustices so directly, they will be swept away. They will be swept away by the amount of group harmony and peace that is being felt. So that is what I hope the second half of this year brings. Again, it's all up to individual people and their use of individual free will. So, to give a summary, the impact of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction goes back to at least February 20th, 2025, and probably even before that. In other words, much of the disruption we've seen in America and the world since Trump's inauguration is related to this conjunction, among other aspects. And the February 20, 2026 date is only the culmination, not the beginning, of the influence of this conjunction. We may see some visible peak around this time, and we have some aftershocks in March and April as Saturn and Neptune shift from southern declination to northern declination. A lot of stuff will probably happen in the first part of this year. Very worried about that April 17th new moon, but realize that we have already been undergoing the impact of this conjunction and its strong impact on America pretty much since the beginning of 2025. We're in it now. It's not something that's going to happen in a week or two. We're in it now and have been for a long time. Also, the invasion of Venezuela, killing of Renee Good, Trump's capitulation at Davos, and the killing of Alex Preddy were all impacted by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. America is being particularly hard hit by this conjunction, since it squares natal Venus exactly to the degree in the July 2nd, 1776 chart. And Let's see. We shouldn't forget that Neptune at the start of Aries is also where it was at the start of the American Civil War, making that strong square to natal Venus. This is a tsunami of a conjunction. Since the last Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the beginning of Aries, the world point occurred approximately 6,000 years ago in 4361 BCE. Russia is expected to be impacted, but the full impact could unfold either slowly over the next few years or it could happen suddenly. We just don't know which will be the case, since obviously several other variables are also involved. Aftershocks to this conjunction will occur in late March and April when first Saturn and then Neptune cross the celestial equator to move from southern to northern declination. Pileup of 7 planets in Aries at the April 17th new moon will impact America, Trump, NATO, the United Nations, Federal Reserve, and the New York Stock Exchange. Second half of the year will be far more harmonious for the world than the first half, which will continue to focus on the dissolutional structures. I call July 21st the Great Harmony because the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau felt that it would be the most harmonious day of the century. However, 2-month opposition from Saturn to the USA natal Saturn and to Trump's natal Chiron during July and August will increase tension and restriction for both. Still, long-lasting trines in both charts may provide a lifeline. Transits and progressions to J.T. Vance's chart on July 21st suggest that his status will be elevated in some way around this time. Hence, it is possible, though not by any means a certainty, that Trump will no longer be in office by the end of this summer. Some people may prefer Trump to be replaced by anyone, but Vance's past record shows that he would also likely be a far-right leader. Even more worrisome is that the USA Uranus return is coming up in 2027-2028, and Vance's Chiron and Uranus are activating Uranus in the USA chart. This increases even further the likelihood of conflict either at home or abroad during those years, if Vance is in charge. An additional long-term forecast may be made by me at the end of August once it is seen how events play out between now and then, but for now, all I can do is to wait for things to unfold in their own time. And for this past year, things have unfolded very much in line with what the astrology of this time predicts. Now, after I see how things unfold this summer, where we are by the end of August, then either then or later this fall, I'll probably do an update on what the heck just happened. More events will have occurred. We'll look at those events, do an astrological autopsy on them, see what things we may have expected to happen actually happen, and we'll look at instances where maybe something different happened. Okay, that's the end of this presentation, but before actually leaving, I'm going to go back to the beginning to mention one thing I think you'll find interesting. Even though, let's see, I didn't mention it this time. I think, let me take a look here. Do I have, let's see, let me look at where Jupiter is. Here, I've got Jupiter at 20 degrees of Cancer. And let me look at a USA chart. Here's the USA chart. That's Venezuela's chart. So let me go down to the USA chart. Let's see. Okay, here's a USA chart. In this USA chart, both July 2nd and July 4th charts, Chiron is at 20 degrees Aries. When Renee Good was killed, Jupiter was at 20 degrees Cancer, making a square to Chiron at 20 degrees Aries. Now that square was exact 3 days after Renee Good was killed. Guess who else had the same thing going on in their chart when they were killed? Last fall, in September, when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, when he was killed, Jupiter was at that same position in Cancer. And 3 days after he was killed, the exact square between transiting Jupiter and natal Chiron in the USA chart occurred, just as it did with Renee Good. So, a little interesting tidbit of astrology at work, though not the way we'd like it to work out with the death of people. Okay, and that is the end. That's the end of this presentation. So let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm back. So, it's been long. I hope it's also been interesting. We're in for a lot of rock and roll, quite a ride this spring, particularly for America. Second half of the year is going to be much better for the world, but America's going to have some sort of dark shadow cast over it this summer, as will Trump. But if we all turn inward, if we find our spiritual center, our heaven within, that kingdom of heaven within, that still small voice within, then we'll begin to arrive at an understanding of what is really important and what isn't. And chances are, all this turmoil in the outside world will begin to look more and more to us by a passing shadow. We still have to do what we can to heal these situations, but the situation may ultimately be healed, even though it's good for people to stand up and protest peacefully, make their voices heard. But ultimately, the world will probably change not through our direct confrontations with the evils out there, but by changing ourselves within and realizing that the evils have no power over us or our happiness. So I'll leave you with that thought. Hope you found this interesting. I hope you join me for future presentations. And for now, I'll just say so long and be well.